All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone. I'm Tim Runcie, Project MVP and President of AdvisorCon. For those of you that haven't worked with us before, I'd like to tell you a little bit about us and our Webinar Wednesday series. Basically, we want to boost your project management efficiencies by optimizing your process and technologies, and this will help you create measurable results that empowers you and your organization. We've been in business for 20 plus years in project program and portfolio management and are a gold level project partner with Microsoft. So basically, no matter what size you are, we love to help train, educate, as well as help you build and configure your processes and your technology. For those of us who join on a weekly basis, you know that today's session is part of a series we call Webinar Wednesday. And each week we present a different topic that's designed to be helpful and also instructive, covering a whole series of day-to-day tasks, technologies, and best practices. Today's session is going to be a half hour in length, which means it qualifies for a half of a PDU. I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of our time together. But right now, it's my pleasure to welcome today's presenter, Ken Lowen, Director of Client Solutions. Ken, you may want to take your session off of pause and go ahead and get started.
Thanks very much, Tim. I certainly will do that, and thanks everybody for joining us for today's session on how to create timelines for your projects in Microsoft Visio. We're going to talk about some of the options you have for diagramming timelines so that you know where the Visio solutions fit into your pros and cons evaluation. We're going to talk about some of the formatting capabilities, and we will try to save some time for Q&A. So I'd like to invite you to submit questions that occur to you during my presentation into the questions window in the GoToWebinar window. And as noted, Tim will follow up with talking about PDUs at our wrap-up. So starting off, we've often said that one of the most frequently used project management tools is our friend Excel. And Excel is a great friend of ours because it is so easily accessible. So many people have it. The training curve is relatively simple, relatively flat, and there's a lot of flexibility you can do. But frankly, organizations that spend a lot of time in project management and people who are routine project managers will quickly outgrow the capabilities of Excel to do tools like this. I mean, you can certainly go from this very, very, very simple example I'm showing you here where I literally have just colored cells in order to create a visual representation. Mainly I did it in this because I wanted to do a complex financial analysis and I wanted to supplement that with a graphic to help my target audience understand the information. You can get a lot more complex in this by creating conditional formulas, but frankly, you will outgrow the capabilities that Excel has to help you pretty quickly. And so, you know, once you've moved beyond that, let's go on to our next option. So we spend a lot of time teaching people how to become more effective and efficient in Project Pro, and certainly there are a lot better capabilities in Project Pro. You saw a quick example of the timeline in there. And this is Project Pro 2013. The latest version 2016 is out, and if you're in Office 365, you've probably moved on up to Office 2016. One of the key features that is added in 2016 that a lot of people have asked for is the ability to do multiple timelines, and that is that's an interesting capability, and certainly one of the things that you ought to consider in doing your timeline, because one of the advantages of doing timelines in Project Pro is the information is tied directly to your project schedule. So if you are adjusting your project schedule, you're not really going to waste a lot of time working on adjusting your timeline because frankly, one of the key reasons you do a timeline is to communicate the information to people for whom a visual representation is a big help. And what happens oftentimes is you'll present that information to them and they'll have a really valid question that says, gee, did you mean to do this other thing? And you'll say, yeah, I really did, or that's a great suggestion. And you'll want to make a change. You do that change in your project schedule, and it's a real help if it goes on and is reflected automatically in your timeline. So let's look at how we would create a timeline in Project Pro really quickly before we move on to doing it in Visio. You right-click on a particular task. In this case, it's a summary task, and down here near the bottom of the context-sensitive menu that pops up is Add to Timeline. And it will come right up here in the timeline at the top of the screen with a default setting, and you can click on that, and you then have your standard formatting capabilities that you're familiar with the rest of in Project or Excel or PowerPoint. We can right-click on our Request for Proposals task, and we get that here, and let's format that in a contrasting and equally attractive color. And we could go on similarly and create an increasingly detailed representation. And the fun thing is that as we change our schedule, the timeline changes accordingly automatically. And it's very easy in our timeline view. Just click on it and you get your timeline ribbon up here. You can copy the timeline and paste it very, very easily. Of course, that's not a connected data representation, so if you're creating a presentation or an email and then you subsequently change your project plan, you'll have to come back and adjust or take a new snapshot of the timeline image and distribute it accordingly. So that's a great capability. Project Online also has a timeline capability in it. And so you should consider that also if you're wanting to communicate a visual representation of your project to the folks who are in your enterprise project management environment. But our discussion today is to talk more about additional tools and specifically about Visio. So let's go over into Visio. One of the key reasons that we consider Visio in contrast to Project, because of the favorability of that data connection, is the formatting in Project is fairly limited. But in Visio, we've got a lot more capabilities for doing our formatting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new timeline here. So I've gone into File, New, and I select up here on my suggested searches, Schedules. And when I come into Schedules, I've got an option right here for Timeline. And select that, and I've got my standard US versus metric selection. That's not going to make a lot of difference right now unless you can figure out a difference between a US day and a metric day. And we're going to end up with our typical Visio blank slate to work on. I do want to point out one of the fun things about working in Visio is you can pin one of these to your screen here so that if you're frequently coming in and using, as I do, the cross-functional flow chart or the SharePoint workflow stencils, that is available to you easily once you've used it once, and on an ongoing basis you can find these that you've pinned. Let's go back into our diagram. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a basic timeline in here. We've got three high-level types of timelines that we can present in this screen. We can, let me get my image to zoom in here and highlight these for you. There we go. We can do a block timeline, a cylindrical timeline, or a line timeline. And they all operate the same way. I'm going to pull over a block timeline and just put it onto the page. And it pops up immediately with the configuration window so that I can set the information that I want to represent in my timeline. And so I'm going to set this so that it's going to start at the beginning of the current month and it's going to run through, say, the end of August here. We don't care about time in this timeline because I'm going to be working in the weeks and months, not so much in the hours, although if you have a need to do a minute-by-minute or hour-by-hour timeline, this brings you that capability straight out of the box. And then I can adjust my time scale here. I'm going to leave it at months just because I'm comfortable thinking in that way. And it brings up for me automatically the dates of each month showing me how my time scale is represented in this timeline. We then have the capability to add additional information into our environment. I can bring over a line milestone here, and when I drop it onto the timeline, it automatically grabs the information that makes sense for where I dropped it on the timeline. So I dropped it at approximately mid-month and it picked up that date. I can tell it, gee, I didn't really mean the 17th, I meant the 15th. And again, time isn't going to mean anything to me, but I'm going to just put a description in here, and that's going to be complete my planning phase. I can change my date format if I want to, and for now, this one will work. And so it drops it onto the screen and makes it nicely aligned top and bottom right here with my timeline and sets the date information. I'm going to do another couple of these right here, and so we'll have that as there, and it's start, project, close out phase, and we'll leave that phase the same way. And it's defaulted to setting the information to the same alignment here so that it's keeping a nice visual representation. And as we add more information, we may need to adjust that. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. We can click on one of those and go up to our timeline ribbon up here and make any changes we need to. So we can bring back our configuration window by clicking on the configure button there. Let's take a look now at adding an interval to our screen or to our timeline here. And so this is going to be we're going to do the execute phase, and so I'm going to want to pull that a lot closer to my planning phase. So in fact, we'll start that on Monday the 18th, and we're going to let that go for through the end of July, right here. And so this is going to be execute phase. And there we are. Now, this is pretty boring, and so there's an awful lot that we can do in order to change our design if we want to. We pull up our design window, and we can change to the various themes that are here, so we can get some ideas that Microsoft has identified as colors that go together a little bit better. And once we've done that, we can then select some of the design variants that they have if we find something that seems to work a little bit better for our organization. But let's pull that one because we can still see it pretty well, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that maybe you can see a little bit more of the information in that timeline. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to add another timeline right here at the beginning and show you how we might work with some of this information. So right here I'm going to have we're going to have a stakeholder summit, and you see that we've got a little bit of an issue there with our text colliding. Well, there are a couple of different ways that we can deal with that. We can select one that we want to move, and you see we've got this yellow selection handle appearing right here, and so I can certainly move it over that way. That doesn't quite solve the problem. I can pull it down, and that might be acceptable to me, or I could just drag the whole thing down and put this back up at the top once I grab that yellow handle and pull it off to the side just a little bit. And when I drag it over, then I get an angle so that it looks consistent with the other. If instead what I'm wanting to do is maybe create this sample one here, we'll do another stakeholder summit later in the project. And if what I want to do for this is make some sort of an alignment for these to appear in the same way, I can add some guidelines. And so let me do view and guides, and I'm just going to grab one up at the very top. Let me show you again what I did. I pulled my pointer up here onto the ruler, and when it appears as a double-headed arrow, I can grab that, bring it down, and it then becomes a guideline for me. And I can align things onto that guideline so that I've got my project schedule items there, and I can grab another one down here and bring it down and make sure that my stakeholder summit items appear the same. And then I'm just going to add in some additional items here. I'll put in a line and run it right along there and change my formatting a little bit so that I can then add in some text and bring those there and bring a few things down here, and we're going to copy that, bring it down here, and I can call this stakeholder dates. And so when I turn off my guidelines, now I'm able to format some information in a way that makes this project just a little bit more easily communicated to my team. One of the options I have also is I can add in a representation for today really easily. So I just drag this today marker from my stencils over here, and I'm going to drop it on the timeline, and you see it's moved immediately to today's date, so that as I open and refresh this timeline, that representation will move and show everybody where we are at any particular time. An alternative representation, if we wanted to do it, let's go back and maybe we get rid of that for a moment, and we can bring in elapsed time. And so we're going to just drag this in, drop it, and here's our elapsed time indicator, and we can change the format of our elapsed time indicator to fill it with a more prominent color, and then show everybody here's how we are moving through our project life cycle. So depending on which one works for you. Another fun capability that we have in Visio that'll help you communicate information about your project is to do an expanded timeline. So I'm going to just drag it down a little bit and get a little additional real estate, and I'm going to bring this expanded timeline off of my timeline shapes and drop it here on the page. And I'm now going to give it some dates. And what I want to do is I want to expand on my execute phase. I made it kind of big in the main timeline, but let's assume that it doesn't have quite as much time there as it really does, and maybe not enough room to represent the information we want to do. And it's now automatically tied itself to the main timeline. And I can now add in information into this timeline to further represent our phases. And so let's go here, and we're going to set June 1 to June 15th as testing, and put that right there. And we can then fill that with another color and change the text there. And so now we've got an expanded timeline that is showing additional information out there. We can certainly play with additional formatting options in Visio. We can add in a background if we want to, so that maybe we've got our company logo appearing, or a standard signature or drawing labeling block. All those typical Visio capabilities exist here. One of the things that we can additionally do is we can quickly share this if we want to. And so if we just go into File and Share, what we've got is the capability to save this to a OneDrive location, a OneDrive for Business, and then share it using the powerful SharePoint sharing capabilities. We could, of course, email that, but you all know how to do that. What I want to show you is I want to show you another new capability, or another interesting capability in here that ties together Visio with Microsoft Project. And so if we go into our timeline view up here, we're going to, let's see, import some information. There we go. We click on the timeline, and we click on Import Data, and select a Microsoft Project file to import. And I've got this in a Webinar Wednesday folder for showing you, and we're going to bring up our project schedule here. And once it pulls the data in, I can go next. Whoops. I bet I've got it open in another window. So let me get that closed. And okay, so that has closed. And we're going to bring it up again. And next. And we have some options here as to which tasks we want to bring in. We can bring just our top-level tasks, we can bring our milestones, our top-level tasks and milestones, or everything. I'm going to select to bring top-level tasks and milestones, and then we can identify what are the types of design criteria that we want to use, and I'm going to use the same selections as I did on the drawing that we created manually. Create next and final. And what this does is this creates an accelerator for bringing information that you've already got in a project plan. This is not connected to that project plan, but it may simplify you translating the information you've got from one venue into another. You can then come in here and do all of your standard formatting requirements and capabilities just as you would have in the other environment. And so on and so forth. And what you'll find then is you end up with collisions and other issues that relate to dates here, and so we can change this and we can say, well, for this interval type we want to pull the information out and we're going to make this, say, a curly bracket, and it'll pull out above. We can then change our text if we want to and make it more easily readable. This one we want to be consistent, so we're going to change the same interval to another curly bracket, and hello, we've ended up with our date collisions again. And so we can certainly move this upward if we want to. We could have moved it down to the bottom of the, to below the timeline if we wanted to. All those options are still available to us. I think one of the important things to recognize about this is the ability to change your formatting selections, as I've just done, by right-clicking on a particular graphic and selecting another option for that. At this point, Tim, I'd like to pause and ask if we've got any questions from the audience.
Perfect, Ken. Looks like you may have even started answering some of the questions as you've gone through there. Let me run through a couple. Number one, is there a way to accelerate this if I have an MS project file?
Okay.
Which I think you just kind of walked through some of those steps, which is actually pretty exciting to port that directly over project. But go ahead if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I did show you briefly all of the options or the additional options you have for pulling more of the data from your MS project file over. One of the things that that you want to think about, of course, is having that file saved and closed before you pull the import over, so that you're not creating the conflict in it. And then make sure that you have, because these are not connected, do remember to make sure that you're keeping them synchronized and you've got the most current information in project before you pull it over to Visio and spend a lot of time doing your data update. You've got every capability that you've got to connect your Visio shapes, as I've demonstrated in prior webinars, for things like flowcharts and other data graphics. You can connect a shape in a Visio timeline to your data. We find down here on our context-sensitive menu, when we right-click down in Data and Shape Data, we've got the opportunity to pull items about our tasks, maybe from a Project Online project. You can pull task names, you can pull start and finish dates, and if you want to create additional fields in here that will pull information from your Project Online, you certainly can do that. And by keeping your Project Online up to date, your synchronized Visio file can be kept up to date. And so that's a powerful capability that's out there also.
Sure. Couple questions, and I'm going to kind of merge these together. Jim asks, can you create a timeline from a project server file? And then Gene asks, can I use a project from Project Online? So we both have the on-premise schedule or the online schedule.
Sure. Okay, so we talked about I touched briefly on that, so let me close the loop on that conversation. So if you've got a project file in Project Server, you can certainly open it in Project Pro, save it locally as an MPP file, and then do what I just did, click on the timeline and pull import data. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to map the data that you've got in your project server environment via either OData or SQL, and do your data connection as we've shown here with our shape data, so that you would actually go into the data menu, you would click on link data to shapes and identify where you want to pull the data from. Your source in that case would be something like your SQL data, or you could create you could use a previously created connection. And the same thing would apply for your Project Online data, although you would have to go through a couple of extra steps in order to create that SQL Server database. The approach that we typically do when clients are looking for that is we create a SQL database in Azure and keep that synchronized with the Project Online environment, and that would certainly be available to you. If you've got a specific need for that, please reach out to us afterwards through contact@advisicon.com.
You know, Ken, while that screen's still open, whoops, if you want to bring the link to shapes, if everyone could take a quick look here, is not just linking it to the back end, but a lot of times you can have simple workflow that puts data into a SharePoint list. So whether that is a project server or a project online component, is that Visio can be linked to data that's in any of those places, and with that connection you have it connected directly. So again, with a direct file, obviously you can always synchronize between your Visio diagram and certainly publish that into SharePoint. Ken, we've got time for one more question. There's actually several in the queue, and I promise we'll get back to everyone in terms of what we're saying, but let me post this last one here. It says, how do you hang tasks where the time frames overlap on the timeline?
Okay, so tasks where the timelines overlap. So there's a couple of different approaches that you could do for that. With the intervals, we'll just pull another block interval in here, and I'll drop that over the timeline at that point. And so this is my overlapping task. And what I would then do with my timeline, whoop, there we go. And then I would tend to, okay, this is not doing what I want it to do. I'm going to have to punt on that one, and I will get back to you after I've tested this more.
Yeah, normally I stagger them directly in the timeline, or what I'll do is I'll use an expanded timeline to call that out. So a lot of times when we have overlapping activities where we really do want to see it, is it will kind of stagger the graphics. Right now, Ken, I think yours is just connecting directly. So both the expanded approach, which says grab this one piece and then blow it out, and then you can show different areas, or what you can do is line up the two pieces.
Right.
Okay, well, let me make sure we stay on top of our schedule. And again, if anybody has future questions or additional questions around this, do feel free to reach out to Ken or any one of our team directly. It's always fun for us to go through and kind of answer questions. And again, this is what we love to do, is teach. We get to practically implement, and in terms of also writing books around that. So let's kind of wrap up here. What I do is, again, thank you, Ken, for taking your time today and just helping us see some of the valuable insights for both what you can do in Visio as well as synchronization with Project directly into Visio. If you're interested in having an opportunity to explore some of these technologies, or perhaps even maybe a private demo session, feel free to reach out to us. In many cases, whether it's SharePoint, Project, Visio, Office 365, in fact, we're even having a lot of requests coming in around Power BI. I'm happy to kind of take that directly to you guys and answer questions. In fact, Microsoft even allows us to set up maybe even a free trial. So a lot of times people want to get it and test it out. Let us know. As I mentioned at the beginning of our time today, this session does qualify for half a PDU. The key thing that I need you to do is that there will be a short survey that will appear in your browser once we close this session. So you do need to fill that out, as we're required by PMI basically to keep a record and a history of people who've attended. And again, this program is for you. So if you see topics or things, if you like this or you want more, let us know, because everything that we present really is influenced by you, our audience, and our customers. So a lot of times, let us know what you think. If you want something new or different or deeper, we're happy to take that feedback. And again, we forecast out about 3 months of different schedules for what we're presenting in Webinar Wednesday. Again, once I have your survey input, you'll receive an email from me on Friday with the PDU number. And again, this session was recorded, so you're going to find this in our AdvisorCon YouTube channel, basically uploaded by the end of this week. Again, thank you for your time, and if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, I encourage you to do that. There's a lot of great recordings in there of previous sessions, as well as additional tutorials. With that, I think we've covered all the information, and so if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out directly to myself or Ken, and everyone from here at AdvisorCon. We thank you for your time and your attentiveness.
Thanks very much.